This is the BBC.
Hello, you've downloaded a podcast of BBC Radio 4's The Food Programme. Welcome to our world, from cooking to culture, politics to pleasure. We hope you enjoy it.
Mike had always been a little bit kind of on the plumper side and a foodie. Loved cooking, loved shopping for food and enjoyed the finer things in life. We thought we were quite healthy in what we ate, really, and we were following the guidelines. At least a third of his diet was starchy carbohydrates, bread, rice, pasta. He was a little bit overweight, but he decided that in an effort to lose the weight, he'd join a Learn to Row group. And on the 12th of September, he phoned me after his rowing session, and he said that it was the most intense session that he'd ever done. And he said he felt nauseous. And once I heard that, alarm bells rang. And within 5 minutes, he'd phoned and said, "Can you pick me up from the bridge, please?" And I knew I had to bring my handbag and my coat because I wasn't coming home. And he was having a massive heart attack on the bridge.
You got medical treatment. You
Yes.
got beyond.
And they were marvellous. They were amazing. And the care he received in CCU was very, very good. It started to fall down a bit when he came back from the cardiac rehab with a picture of what was called the Eatwell plate. And there were a few items on there that I had misgivings about. The percentage of carbohydrates, starchy carbohydrates, was very, very high. And I had witnessed, working in a clinical trial for type 2 diabetics, that following a diet like this caused their blood sugars to escalate into dangerous levels. And I was surprised that this is what he was being prescribed, if you like, as the lifestyle. We have ignored these guidelines.
As she says, Linda Sackett has fed her husband back to health, ignoring the official advice embodied in the government's Eatwell guidelines. This is our second programme about health and diet. Earlier this year, we talked to the medical students and young doctors who are campaigning to change what they're being taught in medical school because they feel unprepared to deal with the onslaught of diseases they're faced with, caused not by infections or genetic disorders or malfunctioning immune systems, but by the way we live, mostly by what and how we eat: obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, strokes. So we thought we'd dig deeper and ask today, if most doctors are not yet being trained to treat these lifestyle diseases, what dietary advice is being handed out to the sick? And who's responsible for that advice? And is it helping or harming?
Currently, our healthcare system is failing, and we have an epidemic of misinformed doctors and misinformed and harmed patients unwittingly. There's commercial conflicts of interest. We need to increase awareness if we're going to resolve and improve the system. Unless we do that, honestly, our healthcare and our health across the population is doomed.
So I'm Dr. David Unwin. I'm a GP from Southport. I've been working there, I think, for 32 years now. So I'm now the oldest doctor in the practice.
I mean, in front of us, you have a printout
Yes.
of Public Health England's Eatwell Guide.
Yes.
Now, you don't follow the Eatwell Guide.
Well, I tried to. I really did. Much of the guide is good. I love the green veg. There are healthy things there. But what I found was, over many years, my patients just seemed to get fatter and I was adding medication. What I have found and what I'm trying to do is get people to give up sugar and starchy carbs, because the starchy carbs digest down into sugar. And that's something that people don't always realise, that breakfast cereals alone will break down into quite a lot of sugar. So that if you have type 2 diabetes, it's going to make it hard to get control of your disease if you're having extra sugar. A small bowl of cornflakes will affect your blood glucose to the same extent as 8 teaspoons of sugar. That's even if you haven't put sugar on the cornflakes. And then if you have some fresh orange juice with your cornflakes, you've added the sugar burden even more. So for me, the information that breakfast cereals break down into rather alarming amounts of glucose is very useful for patients making a dietary choice. I didn't used to tell them any of that. I'd actually forgotten it. And I'd just completely forgotten. And I used to talk about sugar, and I'd forgotten about starch altogether. And it was actually one of my patients who reminded me, Dr. Unwin, have you forgotten that starch breaks down into glucose? Was that not covered at medical school? A wonderful woman, and of course she was right.
Well, was it covered at medical school?
Do you know, not really.
I mean, given that we know that doctors, even now, do not learn much about nutrition at medical school, this is the ultimate. This is Public
Yes.
Health England. How damaging, do you think, that plate is? I mean, the fruit and vegetable section of this guide is almost the same size as the sliced bread in a plastic bag, white flour, breakfast cereal, potatoes, spaghetti, rice, porridge, Weetabix, and so on.
Yeah. I think my concern with this is that if it's supposed to be what we should advise the entire population to do, I find a third of it is carbohydrate that digests down into sugar. And that's a worry to me, because actually somewhere between 10 to 15% of the population either have type 2 diabetes or pre-diabetes. It may be even more. And when you look at that, it's not just the carbohydrates on the right side there, the starchy carbohydrates. You've also got bananas, you've also got raisins, which add to the burden of sugar. Oh, and there's grapes as well there, you see. So that quite a few things would digest down into sugar. And that for somebody with type 2 diabetes is not necessarily the best advice. And nowhere on there does it mention that if you have type 2 diabetes, you may need to think about this. So
or as you say, even if you don't, you need to think about it.
Yeah, so
perhaps.
I applaud all the green veg. I love to see that. And they have made many improvements here. I'm very pleased not to see sugary drinks anymore. That's progress. But I worry that when a third of it is starchy carbs, with the addition of the bananas and the raisins and the grapes, is rather a lot of sugar, or soon-to-be sugar, is there. And I wonder if we could improve it a little.
Last year, David Unwin's practice underspent their diabetes drug budget by £38,000. And in 2016, he won the NHS Innovator of the Year award for his work with his diabetes patients. I talked to him earlier this week when he and a group of other distinguished medics were giving evidence in the House of Commons to the All-Parliamentary Group for Diabetes, along with some patients.
Yeah, I'm Mark Hancock. I'm a financial advisor, but in 2010 I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Had it for around 6 years before I discovered there was a different way of eating, which I'd found out myself, and I managed to fully reverse my condition. I'm no longer diabetic. I'd read some articles where the World Health Organization were talking about how it was possible that you could reverse diabetes. I went back to speak to my GP and nurse, and they said, absolutely not, you can't reverse diabetes. I'm afraid it's a chronic condition, you'll just get worse as time goes by and you'll need more and more progressive medication. I was listening to the Jeremy Vine show on Radio 2, and they had Dr. Michael Mosley on there. And he came and he said, well, perhaps we've been treating diabetes or diabetic patients incorrectly. We've been recommending the wrong types of food. And actually, if you ate a sort of a meal plan based around low-carb foods, but based around the Mediterranean diet, that they've seen a lot of evidence that people are starting to reduce their medication or come off the medication completely. And I said to my wife at the time, I said, we've got to try this. And I was fully prepared to eat cardboard for 8 weeks, and it was nothing like that. The food was gorgeous, and the weight started falling off really dramatically, and my blood sugar had fallen into quite low levels really within a week. And I remember, because I'd already spoken to my nurse about it, and this was a different nurse by then, and she'd said, yeah, go for it. And at the end of that first week, I phoned her up and said, look, my blood sugar levels are quite low. They're in sort of the 3 range now. And she said, stop the medication. You don't need it anymore. And you can just imagine how that feels to someone who thought, it had only been a month or so before they were threatening to put my medication up. And now someone was telling me I didn't need it anymore.
My name's Dr. Aseem Malhotra, and I am an NHS consultant cardiologist. The number one risk factor for heart attacks is something called insulin resistance. in layman's terms, your body becomes more resistant to the hormone insulin over time. Another way of looking at it is almost like a pre-diabetes. And really that is driven by dietary patterns that include a lot of processed carbohydrates and sugar. And everything, all of our approach in tackling heart disease, which really started off in the 70s, has resulted in us eating a lot more refined and processed carbohydrate foods, which is clearly linked very strongly to driving obesity and type 2 diabetes. As a qualified doctor for almost 17 years, I have come to the conclusion that diet and lifestyle changes are much more powerful at preventing and treating heart disease. Being aware of this issue and also having patients who, having treated them for heart attacks, doing keyhole heart surgery, we were serving them junk food and it just didn't make any sense. We had an oversupply of cheap, sugary processed foods everywhere. Even our hospitals had become a branding opportunity for junk food. If this carries on as it is, then our NHS is going to collapse.
It's not just controversial cardiologists such as Aseem Malhotra who are questioning the side effects of decades of official advice to avoid fat. Thameside and Glossop Hospital is at the centre of one of England's most economically hard-pressed areas, with the health statistics to match. Working with local authorities, the hospital is making diet the linchpin of a revolution in healthcare. Last year, they started on a sugar-free revolution, and on July the 4th, they're going totally sugar-free.
Well, I'm Susan Osborne. So one of the things that we were looking to do was how we were going to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the NHS. And 70 years ago, at the start of the NHS, the country had come out of the war, there was huge austerity, there'd been rationing, and the government decided that we as a nation needed a little treat, and so they increased sugar. I'm sure they did it with the best of intentions, but look where it's led us. We've got this love affair with sugar. It's crippling the NHS now. It's nobody's fault, but it needs to change.
My name is Karen James, and I'm the Chief Executive of Thameside and Glossop Integrated Care Organisation. Healthy life expectancy in Thameside and Glossop is 57.7 years for males and 58.3 years for females. We've got a lot of cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease, cancer, mental health problems. So there's lots of problems that we're going to have to resolve.
In terms of diet, the sort of general advice on what you should eat is a bit different from what you have decided to do here.
I think for the general public it can be quite confusing, the advice they receive. So what we've said is we know that sugar is not good for you, so that's where we've started. We know from our chef and working with our dietitians how we can actually improve the choice in terms of our meals, both for patients and staff. So we have been working with the dietitians and the chefs who have a great understanding of what's good for you, what's a balanced diet and so forth. And that's what we've tried to do here, is make it simple for our staff to make the right choices and remove all those temptations that we have within our canteens and other areas.
My name's Sarah Moody. I'm a gastroenterology nurse specialist here at Thameside Hospital. So commonly now people are on a 12-hour shift, and then when you're running around and you're concerned about, is this patient going to surgery, is that patient well, they seem to be getting more poorly today, are you actually going to sit down and stop and eat something properly? Because I think most people don't, and they tend to grab for things, and that's where the move to kind of get sugar out of the hospital comes in. We've seen lots of changes in places like the canteen. All the kind of confectionery sweet stuff has disappeared from vending machines. It's not out on the shelves anymore. And as well, when you go to places like the shop that's downstairs in the main foyer, as soon as you walk in now, the cabinet that you see has got things like Weight Watchers meals in them that are no added sugar. And there's lots of more healthy options. There's more fruit, and with the meal deals you see in there, the sweet and sugary snacks have actually been removed from the meal deals. So I think, wherever you're going in the hospital, where the hospital has the control, people are really getting that option of seeing healthier choices so that you're not intrinsically led towards kind of high sugar, high fat foods.
The hospital adopted this low sugar or no sugar for staff, and it's about to go completely sugar-free. How did you feel when this was announced?
For me, I'm a gastroenterology nurse. I talk to people about how their bodies work with food all the time, and I know how hard it is for people, and I know from my own struggle how hard it is. And actually, we're a healthcare provider, and I think fundamentally, as a hospital, we should not be encouraging people to make unhealthy choices in any area of their lives. We're not doing this because it's a whim. We're doing this because we've got substantial evidence that demonstrates to us that sugar is something that potentially is very dangerous for all of us if it's not managed well. And I think nowadays our busy lifestyles lead us to use more processed foods, and they very much have lots more added to them, and sugar is one of the components that you see at the top of many ingredient lists. You know, as healthcare providers, we should be prepared to lead by example.
So Simon, how are you doing with our sugar-free biscuits? I know I've set you a bit of a task.
I'm currently still working on it. We are looking at several recipes. I'm going to trial them out like a master chef trial and see if they work out well. If they come out well and they taste nice, then we should be putting them into production for you in the next couple of weeks. But it's an interesting challenge, sugar-free biscuits.
You better introduce yourself, haven't you? I mean, we've run into the head chef by the vending machine. So
my name's Simon Smith. I'm the senior head chef of the Tameside Hospital. What we do, when we do like a specials, we print off the recipes with all the ingredients and the recipe list so people can actually make them at home. So they see the food that we prepare, and then they can actually take the recipe home and produce it at home. And because it was Eid on Friday, we did the lamb seat kebab as our healthy choice. Because of the high, like I said, we use pita bread to control the carbohydrates. The lamb mince was very high in natural protein, and then, like I said, the salad was our fibre base, so it was a very good dish to go on the week. Last week we had Health and Wellbeing Week, and we put on a number of dishes. We took the cheese and onion pie off for that dish on the day to introduce a healthier option to see how well it will go.
When you say healthier option,
we had a very high level pie menu originally when I first started a year ago. We're slowly changing that to a more of a grill bar style, so we're having grilled meat with salads, keep the fibre levels up, keep the carbohydrate levels down and the salt levels down, and then it will naturally build health and nutrition within our customers. If we're going to take away the carbohydrates and you're going to take away the sugars, the natural thing to replace it would be the fibre. Fibre is one of those nutrition that I've just not been noticed.
And good fats, because you're using butter here.
And cheese.
And cheese.
We do, and that's the other point. The cheese is made with natural fats, natural animal fats. They will be absorbed into your body or utilised by the body naturally. Yeah, and then everything else will actually be part of your natural diet. We're not using any fats that are just going to clog up your arteries. The HCC from the cheese is a natural animal fat, so it either goes to protecting your kidneys, protecting your arteries or other vital organs, which is what natural animal fats do. Because we reduce phyllo instead of normal pastry, short crust pastry, the carbohydrate level is reduced. That way we have less carbohydrates, which turns into sugars if it's not utilised. Carbohydrates are the big problem. The sugars, people don't understand carbohydrates contain sugar and starches. Both in essence are the same thing. They don't realise that carbohydrates in pastries, refined carbohydrates in pastas, refined carbohydrates in rice. Yeah, if you do not get rid of sugar and starch out of your diet or reduce it significantly, you're going to have an excess buildup of fat and you're going to get diabetes or something similar. The methodology that we use has a lot of scientific sense behind it.
Right outside the restaurant, there are several vending machines, and this one has food and soft drinks in.
Within the remit of what we're allowed to do, we are slowly changing our suppliers' way of thinking to bring the healthier choices in instead of what the more popular brands would be, which is very large-scale chocolates, the dairy milks, and very large-scale packs of crisps like the Watsits, which are very heavy in salt or heavy in sugar on either side of the scale. So the ones we've got, a lot of hospitals have become like retail outlets where they'd rather utilise the spaces in there to sell it to a retailer. That way you're getting the funds from the retailer, but in reality you're being a hypocrite because your retailer will be selling all the things that you're telling people not to eat. So it makes no sense a retailer coming into a hospital environment and then basically selling everything that your NHS England are telling people you've got to stay away from. Where, considering where we're at now, it's a long way forward than where we were a year ago, which I've got to admit. When you've got something like 6,000 on-site personnel, that's a very good footfall for any business, so it's hard to say no to it. But the reality is, as NHS, you have to hold yourself up to a higher standard. As I've said to you, do we start selling cigarettes? Would that be the way to go? If it's all about profit, then why not? If we're just looking at profit. But in reality, the moral standing tells us that selling cigarettes is wrong. Sugar is going to be going that way soon enough.
I mean, you are fighting a wave, a tsunami of commercial reality about hospitals, because in the great PFI, Private Finance Initiative, is how most of our new hospitals have been built. You've got a hospital system which has a commercial underpinning.
Absolutely, Sheila. That's part of the problem. There are contracts in hospitals that even ensure that bed-bound patients, when people suffer a heart attack, we have to, normally the standard of care is for the first 24 hours they're bed-bound. They have contracts where they have to take sugary drinks, crisps and chocolates to the bedside.
What?
Absolutely. This actually was taking place in one London hospital I worked in, and I found this out, that this was actually part of the contract. So we have to make sure that, when those contracts run out, the chief executives of those hospitals in advance say, okay, when the contract's due for renewal, then this is going to be removed, because this is just really not acceptable. And what it does, it perpetuates a revolving door of healthcare. So they may be getting short-term some financial gains from selling, crisps and sweets and sugary drinks on the premises. But actually, when you look at the whole system, it's causing, great harm and great cost.
Those commercial contracts have had a powerful effect. I looked at the Costa Cafe and shop on the ground floor of the hospital, and it might be better than it used to be, but you'd still struggle to avoid very appealing, refined carbohydrate foods. You yourself have a Costa coffee downstairs. How much does that constrain the fact that you're locked into this model? How much does that constrain what you can do?
It is a constraint, I have to say, but we're working with our partners to address that very issue. So they've signed up to memorandums of agreement, and these discussions are going on nationally as well. So they're working with us very closely to change what their offer is, and it's happening. I have to say they've come on board. They've been very proactive in the discussions. They want to work with us, and it's to their advantage, to be quite honest. But I have to say, historically, it's been difficult, but I think again, those partnership arrangements are changing. We have got that ability to work differently with them to change those offers.
I'd like to be a fly on the wall during the negotiations over the new contracts, which Hospital Chief Executive Karen James seems determined to shape her way. But those same high-carb foods are part of what's still advised all over the UK for patients and people recovering from serious health problems, like nurse Linda Sackett's husband, Mike.
A cynic could say, is there some sort of industry, collusion going on there? There's certainly a plethora of research out there that says that a low-fat diet is not the way to go. It's not sustainable. It doesn't work. If it worked, we would not be in an obesity epidemic.
What will it take to get the Eatwell plate revised? This Eatwell plate that goes out to all GPs and nurses and everybody in the medical profession.
I think we could revise Eatwell plate by doing two simple things. One is make sure that the Eatwell plate, or the guidance on what people should be eating, is based upon the totality of scientific evidence on what constitutes healthy eating. But also, Sheila, the other issue for me, which I honestly personally find quite scandalous, is that the Eatwell plate, which is put together by Public Health England, the recent revision of it, several members of the panel of people who decided what goes on the plate had financial ties to the food industry. And I don't think those people, as part of that panel, are deliberately trying to mislead people, but their conflicts of interest, their commercial interests, essentially mean that the plate is not based upon independent scientific evidence. Once that perception of the bias goes from that, then I'm sure we will have a much healthier plate. We need to increase awareness if we're going to resolve and improve the system. Unless we do that, honestly, our healthcare and our health across the population is doomed.
We put these points to Public Health England, who are responsible for the Eatwell guidelines and in general, as the government website says, for making the public healthier. We're speaking to Professor Louis Levy, Head of Nutrition Science at Public Health England. Professor Levy, do you think the Eatwell guidelines are the best guide?
There's a lot of noise from people who are proponents of a low carbohydrate diet, but SACN have looked at the totality of the evidence, the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, and they do not see studies which give the robust level of evidence that have been used to make government advice. The real thing about the Eatwell Guide is it's there to help people understand what a healthy diet is. What it won't do is make you eat it. The difficulty we have in the UK is that people aren't eating a diet consistent with the Eatwell Guide, and we know that from our National Diet and Nutrition surveys. And the continued commentary from people from a non-evidence-based view about different fad diets or different approaches, which haven't been tested in the same way as the evidence base for the Eatwell Guide, means that people are confused. And it's important to remember that we need carbohydrates in our diet because it helps us generate glucose for things like the brain, which is only can use glucose to metabolize. And by choosing the higher fibre varieties, we release those sugars more slowly. Given that the Scientific Advisory Committee in 2015 concluded its consultation on carbohydrates, I'm not expecting them to reopen that debate. The Eatwell Guide is for people who are generally well and don't necessarily considers the ill health conditions. But when SACN reviewed the evidence on carbohydrates and health in 2015, I indicated that they saw no association with type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease when they looked at the totality of the evidence.
There's concern about the conflicts of interest with the food industry. What role do food industry groups play in the guidelines?
We consult a range of stakeholders when doing any work, and we consult food industry in the same way as we consult academia. So there are academics who will work with industry, but in relation to the role on the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, all the members are appointed through a robust public appointments process. If they have a declaration of interest, that is recorded. If it is considered to be a conflict of interest, then they will not have engagement in a particular piece of work. And all of that is done openly and transparently.
But let's finish today's programme on an upbeat note. One-time diabetes type 2 patient Mark Hancock, who reversed his disease without the help of any official guidelines.
And in the morning now I'm having, yogurt, full fat yogurt, so I'm not worried about fat anymore. I was always told you shouldn't eat fat, you should keep it really low. Now I'm eating full fat, and of course it keeps you going for longer. You cut out things like bread and pasta and rice and whole grains, all the things that they've been telling you that actually you should be basing your meals around. When you discover that something like this can have not only such a dramatic effect on you, but there's millions of people out there, and you think, I want to tell them. I really want them to have the opportunity to say, right, okay, you can do something about this. You don't have to live a life where it's just going to get worse and worse. And we all know how it ends. It doesn't have to be that way.
This is the BBC.
If you've liked this programme, perhaps you'd also enjoy our next broadcast, which is all about recovery again, but in a very different way. This time, it's in the world of cycling. We're at one of the world's greatest races, the Giro d'Italia, where riders burn up to 8,000 calories in a day and then have to eat to recover to do it all again the next day. We go behind the scenes with the chefs that make it all possible in Fueling the Peloton, Food and Cycling.